One forgotten bill in a coffee shop sets off a chain of events. A student loses everything, and an obsessed customer loses his mind. In coffee karma, justice turns into poison for both. Coffee karma. In Seattle, the rain never stopped. It slid down glass storefronts, washed the paint off signs, made everything look the same gray. On the corner, where cracks in the asphalt were overgrown with moss, stood a small coffee shop with a peeling sign. Inside, it smelled not of fresh espresso, but of cardboard, an old air conditioner, and cheap air fresheners. Behind the counter was Jessica, 20 years old, a student who no longer believed that studying would take her any further than this squeaking coffee machine. On the side table lay a folder with overdue bills. In her bag, a letter. Her scholarship application had been rejected. On her face, a familiar mask. A smile for customers, the mechanical, "Next, please." The manager passing by glanced at the motivational poster above the counter. Coffee, because meetings are long. He sighed and muttered, "Motivation is like decaf. It seems to exist, but it's useless." Among the visitors, one stood out. David, a regular. Latte with skim milk, 2 sugars. And always the same tip. Coins that clinked but weighed nothing. Today, he laid down 17 cents on the counter and aligned them with a ruler. "I like it when numbers get along," he said without looking up. While paying, he tossed out a phrase as if casually. "I was once fired over a missing cent. The cent was found. I wasn't." That evening, he rushed out, bag with documents, phone, newspaper, coffee cup, too many little things. He left, forgetting a leather wallet on the chair. Jessica noticed first. Inside, $300, and a checklist of expenses, a last line titled "Unaccounted Risks." She stared at the money for a long time. Outside, the rain pounded against the glass as if urging her. A word flashed in her mind. Justice. Years of humiliation, endless shifts, smiles in return for pennies. Why not take compensation? No one would know. She pulled out one bill, $50. The rest she put back, closed the wallet, placed it back on the chair. 50 isn't theft. It's just tipping raised to normal, she told herself. When David returned for the wallet, his gaze lingered on Jessica a fraction longer than necessary. She answered with the same mechanical, "Next, please." And then, as if nothing had happened. But the next day, he came again. David returned the next day. Same rain, same order. Latte with skim milk, 2 sugars. Only his gaze had changed. It lingered on Jessica's face a little longer than usual, not as a customer, but as a man seeking confirmation of his thoughts. She felt it instantly. The machine hissed, steam curled. Her hands moved on autopilot, but inside everything shook. She counted the change deliberately slowly, as if trying to prove, "See, everything's honest, not a penny missing." David took his cup, sat by the window. The newspaper lay beside him, unopened. Instead, stirring his coffee, he asked quietly, almost to himself, "If the foam tilts northwest, is the barista lying, or is it the wind?" Jessica blinked, then forced out, "Honestly, we've got the full wind forecast here." He smiled, not at the coffee, but into his notebook. The rest of the shift went sideways. A woman at the counter threw up her hands after tasting her drink. "I ordered skim. Give me skim. And if you've got a skimmed conscience, too, I'll take that." All eyes turned to Jessica. She tried to smile, but the manager was already there, frowning. He led her to the back room, which smelled of damp cardboard. "I'm for you," he said quietly, "but I'm even more for accountability. Understand?" She nodded, unable to answer. Back at the counter, she saw David again in line. This time, he handed her a large bill. "Break this for me? I'm short on exact records," he said. She counted the change under his watchful gaze, sweat running down her back. Each movement of her fingers was recorded by his eyes, like through a camera lens. He nodded, tucked the bills into his wallet, and made another note in his notebook. Jessica saw him tuck the bills and write something down. She suddenly realized he wasn't drinking coffee. He was drinking her mistakes, and now he had started collecting them. David started coming more regularly than clock strikes noon. Now, almost every day, always at the same time, always at the same window. In front of him wasn't just a notebook, it was a whole system. Colored tabs labeled change, syrup, foam. Pages covered with arrows, numbers, notes. He flipped them with the pedantry of a man checking a tax return. Jessica first tried to ignore it, but the more often he raised his eyes, the more her hands shook. Mistakes multiplied, too much syrup, change given in rattling coins that mocked her. Sometimes he rejoined the line just for one phrase. "If a pastry falls butter side down, is that gravity or complicity?" he asked once, looking straight into her eyes. "Here, everything falls," Jessica replied. "We just don't always admit who pushed." The customers laughed, taking it for a joke. For her, it sounded like an interrogation. In secret, Jessica made a plan. Return the $50 anonymously. The shop had a take a penny jar for small change. One evening, she slipped the bill in, but it stuck out awkwardly, like a leaf on the wrong tree. The manager noticed first. He held it up and said aloud, "Someone decided $1 counts as change too?" and laughed. The customers exchanged glances. David made a note in his change tab. Later, closing the shift, Jessica rehearsed softly at the counter. "I found your wallet." "Found a wallet? Where?" asked a random customer near the door. She jumped so hard she nearly dropped a cup. The man just shrugged and left. But for her, it was a signal. Even words now felt dangerous. Any phrase could become evidence. And somewhere nearby, another microphone was already running. David's visits turned into a play, with one audience and one actress. He arrived on schedule, sat by the window, placed his phone next to his cup. The screen always dark, but the speaker aimed at the counter. That day, his provocation seemed almost accidental. Jessica was wiping near the poster, "Leave a penny, take a penny." She smiled nervously and said aloud, more to herself than to anyone, "Well, nobody notices small change. The sign says it's allowed." David slightly raised his head, as if registering evidence. Fingers touched his notebook, and the phone flashed faintly. That evening, Jessica made a desperate move. She slipped the $50 bill into the coat of a regular customer, mistaking it for David's. The man found it and exploded. "What is this setup? You think I'm stealing money?" he shouted across the shop. Jessica tried to explain it was a mistake, but her words stuck. David sat in the corner, writing notes under his change tab. His look said, "Suspicion confirmed." The recording kept running. In the background, the manager told another barista, "I steal too. Time from the corporation. What can you do?" The full file sounded like a joke, but the excerpt with her phrase, "Well, nobody notices small change," turned into a confession. Irony sharpened at the worst moment. David's earbud broke. Sitting by the window, he replayed the recording, leaned to a neighbor, and asked, "Did she say nobody notices small change, or nobody notices skim milk?" The neighbor shrugged. David frowned and wrote, "Probable confession. Verify later." Jessica saw his hand sliding over the notebook and understood it was no paranoia. This was method. Every breath of hers now lived in someone's table. David sat in the corner, hunched over his phone, replaying the recording again and again. For him, it was confession. For her, a loop. And the next day, the file was already in someone else's mailbox. The recording surfaced unexpectedly. Nobody really knew who had sent it. Most likely, David uploaded the file through the coffee chain's complaint form. The system automatically forwarded it to the regional office, bypassing everyone local. The algorithm flagged key words, theft, honesty, barista, and started a chain. The manager got called in. Then he called Jessica. The back room was cramped, smelled of bleach and damp cardboard. He played the recording, her voice nervous saying, "Well, nobody notices small change. The sign says it's allowed." The manager stayed silent for a long time, then said tiredly, almost with sympathy, "If I bet on people, I'd bet on you. But my bet is on insurance, and if the system sees you as a risk, my hands are tied." Jessica wanted to explain it was a joke about the poster, that the words were cut out of context. But the manager had already looked away to the laptop screen. On pause was a corporate promo, a smiling barista holding a cup with the slogan, "Trust is our currency." "See?" He waved his hand. The currency fell. She was fired, without police, without scandal, just a standard paper, violation of trust. At first, she tried to fight, wrote a long letter to the regional office, explained in detail that she meant the poster, that her words were cut, that she wanted to return the money. The reply came 2 days later, unsigned, from support@coffeeco.com. "We appreciate your feedback. Thank you for helping us get better." She reread it 5 times. The phrase "get better" sounded like mockery. Meanwhile, rumors spread faster than wet newspapers in the city. Other coffee shops where she tried to apply already knew that girl. Resumes went straight to the trash. In the evening, Jessica sat in an empty apartment. The letter from support@coffeeco.com flickered on the screen. "We appreciate your feedback." And David kept sitting by the window, with his latte and his notebook. The winner. But victory only made him hungrier. After Jessica's dismissal, David seemed reborn. He was no longer just a customer. He now considered himself a civil investigator. His notebook swelled with tabs and notes. New categories appeared: typos, short pours, suspicious looks. In one cafe, a former colleague recognized him, came over with a paper cup and smirked. "Still looking for that scent, Dave? We've written off the furniture, and you're still counting." David looked at him seriously, wrote in witness statements, and said nothing more. He checked everything. In the menu, he found a line: 2 syrups for the price of 1.5. He underlined it in red and asked the barista loudly, "Where's half a syrup? This is fraud. People are missing flavor." The barista just nodded, as if agreeing, and walked into the back. David wrote, "Staff complicity." At work, it looked stranger. In accounting, he spent hours hunting for penny discrepancies. Finally, HR called him in. "David, we're not a bank. We don't need to match down to the cent. We just need to match as a team." He nodded, wrote it down verbatim, and understood that the team was part of the scheme. The firing came quickly. The wording neutral, inability to adapt. For him, further proof. Now he sat in his favorite coffee shop, still by the window, but no longer writing, just reviewing old notes, crossing out, drawing new arrows. His loneliness felt as obvious as the rain outside the glass. The barista, long used to him, set the cup down in advance. This time, smiling, he said, "Your latte. And yes, the foam points south." Customers chuckled, some for the joke, some for silence. When the laughter faded, only the empty coffee shop remained. The city didn't notice their disappearance. The coffee shop kept running. New faces at the counter, new customers by the windows. The manager still made notes, only on different paper. For visitors, this place was nothing more than shelter from the rain. Nobody remembered that here began a small war over $50. The full recording, the very one that became evidence, sank into the regional office archive. On it, you can clearly hear Jessica speaking about the poster, "Leave a penny, take a penny," laughing nervously and adding, "Well, nobody notices small change. The sign says it's allowed." In the background, the manager's voice, "I steal too, time from the corporation." In full, it sounded like a silly joke, but no one listened to context. It was easier to cut one phrase and call it a confession. Jessica left quietly, a suitcase, a bus, gray streets behind. The cab driver who took her to the station grumbled without looking in the mirror. "Traffic jams again because of the rain. Snow would be fairer." She only looked out the window and stayed silent. David remained. In his apartment, he sorted receipts and notes into neat folders, one marked boldly "Evidence." Next to it, a new one, "Evidence 2, Final." He leafed through papers, crossed out lines, started new ones again. Sometimes he played old audio files, listening to them like music. Random words, scraps of laughter, clinking dishes. To him, evidence. To others, noise. In the coffee shop, now without him, silence reigned. The barista dropped a pastry on the floor, butter side down. Nobody looked for the guilty. And the rain kept beating on the glass, indifferent to losses and truths that were never its own.